Dairy is once again at the center of Canada-U.S. trade tension. The U.S. says Canada isn't living up to the spirit of the agreement when it comes to dairy imports, while Canada insists this current system is essential to protect our dairy farmers.
To ensure long-term certainty of the Canada-U.S.-Mexico trade agreement, the United States is calling for sweeping changes within the dairy market.
Canada just made a move that could change the trade fight forever. While the United States wanted more access to Canada's dairy market, Canada locked the door with a law that trade talks cannot easily break. It protects Canadian farmers, keeps control at home, and leaves Washington searching for a way to fight back. The Trump administration imposed a 35% tariff on Canadian goods, the highest rate applied to Canada in the current trade conflict, and listed Canada's dairy supply management system as one of the primary justifications. 2 weeks later, Prime Minister Mark Carney campaigned on an explicit promise that supply management would remain off the negotiating table in any future CUSMA discussions. After the federal election, Parliament passed Bill C-202 legislation that legally prevents Canadian trade negotiators from offering additional concessions on supply-managed sectors, including dairy, poultry, and eggs, in any future trade agreement. The legislative barrier Carney promised is now law, and Washington has not found a way around it. Canada's dairy supply management system has been in place since 1972. It operates through 3 coordinated mechanisms: production quotas that limit how much milk Canadian farmers can produce, minimum price guarantees that protect farmer income from market volatility, and tariff rate quotas that allow a defined volume of foreign dairy products to enter Canada at low or zero tariff rates, with prohibitively high tariffs applied to imports above those quota limits. The high over-quota tariff rates, often exceeding 250% on fluid milk and butter, with some categories exceeding 300%, are what American dairy industry groups and the Trump administration describe as the core of the trade grievance. Approximately 9,000 Canadian dairy farms operate under the supply management framework. They are concentrated in Quebec and Ontario, the 2 most electorally significant provinces in Canada. Quebec dairy farmers have historically been among the most vocal defenders of the system, and no federal party, Conservative, Liberal, NDP, or Bloc Québécois campaigns on eliminating it. The political arithmetic of Canadian dairy supply management has remained unchanged for 50 years. The farmers who depend on it are organized, geographically concentrated in marginal ridings, and mobilize effectively against any politician perceived as threatening the quota system. The United States already has tariff-free access to approximately 3.5 to 3.6% of the Canadian dairy market under the CUSMA agreement, negotiated during Trump's first term. That concession was itself the most significant market access Canada had ever granted to foreign dairy imports, and it was extracted during the most contentious NAFTA renegotiation in the agreement's history. Washington's current position is that the 3.5% access is insufficient, and that Canada's administration of the tariff rate quota system has effectively restricted American exporters from utilizing even the access they were granted. Canadian officials dispute that characterization and point to the quota as fully compliant with Canada's CUSMA commitments. Reuters reported in July 2025 that dairy supply management could sour Canada-US trade talks, describing the system as one of the most politically sensitive issues in the bilateral relationship, and noting that American dairy groups have been lobbying the administration to use the CUSMA review as leverage to extract greater market access. The specific American ask that Carney's government has refused is not simply more quota access, it is a structural change to how the tariff rate quota is administered. American exporters have argued that Canada's allocation of the quota to domestic processors, rather than to foreign importers, restricts their ability to use the access they were granted because Canadian processors who receive quota allocation have no incentive to fill it with American products when they can fill it with domestic supply instead. Canada's position is that the administration of the quota is consistent with its CUSMA obligations, and that American exporters who want access to the Canadian market at within quota tariff rates have a commercial pathway available to them. Bill C-202 removes the legal discretion that Canadian negotiators would otherwise have to offer dairy concessions as part of a broader trade package. Before the legislation passed, a Canadian trade minister could theoretically accept enhanced dairy access as part of a comprehensive CUSMA renewal that delivered gains in other sectors and exchange of concessions across issue areas. That is standard trade negotiation practice. Bill C-202 eliminates that flexibility by statute. A Canadian trade negotiator cannot legally offer additional supply management concessions regardless of what the United States puts on the table in exchange. That converts a political promise into a legal constraint that a future government would need to repeal through Parliament before dairy could re-enter any negotiation. The C.D. Howe Institute published an analysis in 2025 warning that playing with trade talk fire on supply management creates risks for Canada's negotiating position, noting that legislating away negotiating flexibility constrains Canada's ability to make strategic trade-offs in a complex multilateral negotiation environment. That analysis captures a structural tension in Canada's approach. The Bill C-202 constraint protects dairy farmers from concessions, but removes a potential tool from the negotiating toolkit at the exact moment Canada needs maximum flexibility to address tariffs on steel, aluminum, automotive products, and lumber, while simultaneously seeking a 16-year CUSMA renewal. The 35% tariff Trump imposed on Canadian goods in July 2025, the rate that came into effect after negotiators missed the August 1st bilateral deadline, explicitly cited supply management alongside other Canadian trade practices as justifications. That citation is significant because it connects the tariff escalation directly to dairy, making it harder for Canada to address the tariffs through concessions in non-dairy sectors without Washington claiming Canada has not addressed the listed grievance. Canada's position has been consistent. The tariffs are unjustified regardless of the dairy dispute, and the two issues should not be conflated. The CUSMA review that reached its formal July 1st, 2026 opening has not produced an agreement. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc's formal written request for a 16-year renewal did not include any new offer on dairy. The American CUSMA proposal presented on May 29, 2026, which demanded 82.5% North American automotive content and at least 50% specifically American manufactured content, did not explicitly specify new dairy access requirements, but the U.S. Trade Representative's National Trade Estimate Report published in 2026 continued listing Canada's dairy supply management system as an active bilateral trade irritant requiring resolution. Our supply management system is not going to be traded away. It is not on the table. It was not on the table during our campaign. It will not be on the table in negotiations, Carney stated in a press conference during the federal election campaign. That statement, now codified in Bill C-202, describes the legal and political position Canada brings into every CUSMA-related conversation with Washington. The system that protects 9,000 Canadian dairy farms and the rural Quebec and Ontario communities surrounding them has survived 4 decades of American trade pressure, 2 NAFTA renegotiations, and the most aggressive bilateral tariff escalation in the modern history of the relationship. The July 1st CUSMA review deadline came and went without a dairy concession. Washington's next opportunity to raise the issue will arrive at the next bilateral negotiation session, with the same Canadian law on the books, preventing its trade negotiators from accepting any outcome that would expand American access to a market Canada has protected since 1972.